Welcome to Morgan's video blog, Morgan's online blog in video format. Today I bring you Morgan's Reads, January edition. This month I've revised my manuscript and timeline, edited it, and sent it off to a new critique partner. I've vlogged, I've blogged, I've entered Twitter contests, and I've been reading. When you want to be a writer, they tell you that you also need to read. Fortunately for most of us, we were readers first. But I have no willpower when it comes to books. Once I start, I'm driven onward, always needing to know what happens next. I'm not one of those people who can read a book at bedtime and put it down when the clock says 11. Are there people who can do that? I'm not a quitter. I read until I'm done and then I check Kindle to see if there's a sequel. So between my writing and my need for sleep, I went far too long without reading. Last year, I joined Goodreads and set a challenge for myself to read 2 books a month. To make sure that I actually got sleep, I instituted a rule that I couldn't start a new book after 8 p.m. Since I read kind of fast, I read about 100 pages an hour unless it's super dense, like C.J. Cherryh's Foreigner series or Game of Thrones. Those are a little dense for me. But with my reading speed, if I start at 8, that means I shouldn't be too late for bed. And this year, I'm off to a good start. Even if I've completely neglected my looming to read pile, I have already read 4 books. Well, 3 and a novella, but close enough. Confession, my favorite authors and series that I'm already emotionally invested in kind of skip to the front of the line in lieu of those marvelous books that have been patiently waiting their turn. Because if I start something new, I might not stop until I've read everything that author has ever written. Whew. So anyway, first off, I started reading Seanan McGuire. Seanan McGuire mostly writes fantasy, things that I would call urban fantasy. Most of the stuff I've read by her take mythological tales and creatures and play what if in a modern setting. So what if mythological creatures are real and hiding around us? What if Fae still stole babies and played with mortals? I haven't read a thing by Seanan McGuire that I didn't absolutely love. So when I saw she had a series, Indexing, that I hadn't read yet, I tossed it on my holiday wish list and got it. There are only 2 books so far. I read Indexing. Genre is urban fantasy. It's aimed at an adult audience, but it's not explicit. So teens should enjoy it. You've got people working for a living and it's not really a coming of age story. But fairy tales trying to follow their script and force people to act out the stories we all know and love is starting to become a trope, even to someone like me who adores fairy tale retellings. But McGuire's Henrietta, Snow White in Remission, and Sloane, an averted evil stepsister, won me over. They're part of a team for ATI Management Bureau who work to keep fairy tales from manifesting in our world, along with all the collateral damage they usually bring. Henry's the team lead, and she's a bit impulsive, but saving lives isn't really for the meek. The novel's initial serial nature, it was published as a series on Amazon before being turned into a book, is evident with every chapter. Especially the first 2/3 of the book, each chapter easily could stand alone as a short story. As the story builds and the overarching narrative starts to come to fruition, the chapters begin to become a bit more reliant on the previous one. The novel overall was well-paced, and the secondary diverse characters being well-rounded, and we end up with a satisfying climax that opened up more possibilities and complexities for the next episode. Morgan's verdict, 5 stars. If urban fantasy and fairy tale retellings are your jam, you're gonna love indexing. Next, indexing Reflections, the sequel. Same genre. It's less episodic than the first novel, and it gives us more Sloane. And who doesn't find villains, even redeemed ones, a little more interesting than princesses? Plus, we find out we get to watch Henry learn more about her myth, the myth that generates all Snow Whites, the basic concept of red blood on white snow. Sloane's backstory is told, and it suits the novel and the setup, but it somehow felt a little lacking, although it could simply be that I found Sloane too sympathetic and really wanted to fix her story and give her that happily ever after. All in all, Reflections was a satisfying sequel, but it didn't quite measure up to the first. I'd read the sequel again in a heartbeat, though, and I'd read a sequel for indexing Reflections in a heartbeat as well. Morgan's verdict, 4 stars. If you want to know more about Sloane and the myth, this book is for you. Beneath the Sugar Sky. Technically a novella, McGuire's Beneath the Sugar Sky is the 3rd installment in McGuire's Wayward Children series, featuring children who have returned from fairy lands and want nothing more than to go back. The genre is contemporary fantasy. It's not listed as YA, but could easily be considered as such. Earlier in the series, the first book was mostly set in our world as a murder mystery, and the second book featured the backstory of the twin girls, Jack and Jill, in their fairy realm, which was kind of a cross between Dracula and Frankenstein. In this novel, the daughter of the girl who was murdered in the first book comes to our world to find her mother before she's ridden out of existence. That's a little confusing. Basically, her mother died before she was born, and she's got to fix it or she'll cease to exist. So, Beneath the Sugar Sky is a romp through the different fairy realms, with the expected sacrifices, albeit offered on a more generous term than one might expect. From the rational and dark to the whimsical, yet at least internally logical realms, we see the characters in worlds where they fit far better or far worse than they do back home in our world. This is a series about finding your place, that one place where you truly belong, no matter what it looks like. Cora, the main character, goes along with the mission, but she's a new student, and her lack of connection to the other characters translated somewhat to me. I processed the new worlds with her, but we were trying to bring back a character that she's never met, so the urgency was a little lost on me. And the final world was one in which Cora couldn't really relate and kind of felt like an affront to her, which made the world seem a little less real to me, although that might have been the intent. The climax, or at least the big boss battle, was moderately reminiscent of the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland, or at least the version of the Queen who lives in my head. Overall, Beneath the Sugar Skies was a good tale, but I wanted a little bit more, I think. Morgan's verdict, 4 stars, a solid addition to the series, but a little less urgency. Now, for something completely different, romance. Maybe next time I'll pick books based on how good they'll review, but hey, these are what I felt like reading. Sherrilyn Kenyon. She was the first real romance writer that I got into back when I worked in the coffee shop portion of a Borders. I just dated myself with that reference. I'd read a few romances here and there, but this wasn't the historical romances of my grandmother or the Christian romances that I'd borrowed out of curiosity from the church's reading room. This was modern and gritty and played with mythology, another type of retelling. So these days, Kenyon has led me down a new path, and I'm well into her science fiction romance series, The League, which has had several publishers and subseries, so the numbering gets a little tricky. I was looking at my Kindle last week and I spotted a novel in the series that I'd bought, but I didn't remember reading. So I opened it up just to check to see if I'd read it yet, and then my evening was gone. I mentioned I have no willpower. So, Born of Legend. Genre is romance, subgenre science fiction. I'd recommend it to mature audiences because of violence, abuse, and some explicit scenes. It is romance. Earlier in the series, in this sci-fi spacefaring setting, assassins consider themselves the moral compass, keeping politicians in check. But corruption spreads. In the series, most of the male characters are being hunted by authorities, either rightly or wrongly, after some sort of betrayal and abuse. Most of the female characters are just trying to get by and do their jobs, deadly or not, and get drawn into the male lead's troubles, or vice versa. It varies. So, in Born of Legend, book 11 or 9, depending on how you're counting, of the League features Dagger, the street name of the Andarian royal that I loved to hate back before he got disinherited. Dagger believes he's damned, but when he earns the chance at a new life by saving a boy, he works hard to fit in and try to earn redemption for his sins, preferably without any recognition. Born of Legend was everything I've come to expect from the League. Space travel, strong female characters, and tortured males. The biggest downside to this episode was I couldn't keep track of all the characters. As book 11 in a romance series, we've already got 11 people in different couples, plus their families and all those we're setting up for the romances in the next books. Plus, the timeline overlaps with about 3 other books, so those events were mentioned in the background, and I could barely remember them, and I kept getting them confused. Anyway, I liked Dagger's redemption and the truths that came out. The resolution with those characters that I already knew and loved, who had been really wronged by Dagger, rang true for me and gave me an ending I could both enjoy and respect. Morgan's verdict, 4 stars. If you are already reading this series, I would not skip this one. And that's it for my January reads. Maybe next time I get a chance to open a book, I'll look at my backlog instead of the shiny new books. What have you been reading? Let me know, and I'll see you next week.